The sirens always came late. By the time they screamed through the narrow Rotterdam streets, the scene had already gone quiet, the city's dark pulse dimmed beneath the sterile hum of sodium lights. That's when Daan Vermeer arrived. At 42, Daan looked like a man born from bleach and precision. His pale blonde hair was always slicked back and parted mathematically, his shirts pristinely pressed, his hands soft and nearly translucent, the kind of hands that had never allowed dirt to live under their nails. His co-workers at Pure Scene Forensics Cleaning Services said he made murder look hygienic. He took pride in that. The apartment tonight was typical, a domestic argument turned fatal. Blood on the walls, broken glass in the sink, the shadow of a struggle fossilized in stains and streaks. As the detectives finished photographing the scene, Daan stood quietly near the door, inhaling the sharp tang of disinfectant. "They'll never find the weapon," he murmured under his breath, not with malice but with a strange admiration. His colleague Eva Drost, a short, olive-skinned woman in her 30s with a broad jaw and weary eyes, glanced at him. "You talk like you're grading their work." He smiled faintly. "A crime scene is a language, Eva. I just appreciate good syntax." That night, when Daan returned to his spotless apartment overlooking the Maas River, he couldn't sleep. The city outside shimmered with restless lights, reflections of a world out of order. He poured himself a glass of mineral water, adjusted the glass on his table until it sat perfectly centered on the coaster, and stared at his reflection. A thought, as sharp and clean as ammonia, came to him. What if perfection needed to be taught? Daan's first lesson was an accident born of opportunity. A client had called about a fall, a man who'd tripped on his balcony railing and crashed into the pavement below. As Daan cleaned, he noticed details that irritated him. Poor angle of fall, inconsistent fracture pattern, sloppy police assumptions. It wasn't art, it was coincidence. But what if, he thought, someone crafted such a fall? One so flawlessly constructed that even the sharpest investigator would be forced to respect it. A week later, he began planning. He followed patterns, read police reports, noted what detectives missed, the geometry of mistakes that led to certainties. Then, one rainy night in Delfshaven, he found his subject, a lonely widower named Martin de Wilde, 73, living in a fourth-floor flat with a faulty balcony latch. Daan wasn't cruel. He was corrective. He replaced the latch, loosened the railing, calculated the angle. When it happened, it would look like the man leaned too far. And when it did happen, when the next morning's news whispered of a tragic fall, Daan watched the coverage with quiet pride. The detectives called it an unfortunate accident. Perfect. Each accident followed the same principle. Randomness refined into art. A jogger electrocuted by faulty wiring. A drunk who slipped on an unmarked stairwell. A woman found drowned in a bathtub after a supposed fainting spell. To Daan, each was an experiment in composition, the alignment of chaos and logic. He documented them obsessively in a private ledger, detailing his parameters of perfection. Eva began noticing the shifts in him, his growing detachment, his fascination with minor errors in case reports. "Daan," she said one afternoon at the cleaning station, wiping sweat from her brow, "you ever think this job's getting to you?" He looked up slowly, his gloves still on. "If by getting to me, you mean it's teaching me the value of control, yes." She frowned. "You talk like a suspect sometimes." He smiled faintly. "Only if you think cleanliness is criminal." Detective Ruben Clayson, late 40s, broad-shouldered with close-cropped salt and pepper hair and a smoker's rasp, had been in homicide long enough to recognize a feeling. 3 recent accidents had that feeling, the kind that left no mistakes. Too clean, too precise. He'd seen Daan Vermeer at several scenes, quiet and efficient, moving with the grace of someone who already knew where not to step. Curiosity turned into suspicion. Reuben started visiting Pure Scene, asking questions that sounded casual but weren't. "You ever notice," Reuben said one day, "how some accidents look like they were designed by someone who hates disorder?" Dan's eyes didn't flinch. "If that's a crime, detective, I'm guilty of being neat." Reuben smiled thinly. "Neat's fine. Too neat, though, that's when it gets interesting." It wasn't blood that betrayed Dan, it was dust. One of his accidents left a microscopic trail of cleaning residue inconsistent with municipal disinfectants. Forensic chemists found it. When Reuben confronted him, Dan didn't panic. He reasoned. "You're missing the point," he said evenly. "Every detective needs something impossible. I'm giving you that." Reuben stared at him. "You killed people to make us better at solving murders." "Not killed," Dan corrected. "Composed. You just didn't see the lesson." That night, Dan disappeared before the warrant could be signed. His spotless apartment was left empty, except for a single, gleaming glass of water centered perfectly on the kitchen table. Weeks turned into months. Rumors spread. Some said Dan fled to Belgium. Others believed he was dead. Perhaps one of his own lessons turned inward. But Reuben didn't believe it. When new accidents began surfacing, a diver found lifeless in a canal, an art curator crushed by a falling display, the pattern was unmistakable. This wasn't random. It was Dan, still teaching. Reuben began leaving coded public statements, small phrases hidden in press briefings, designed to draw Dan out. "Some men chase perfection," he said once to reporters. "Others drown in it." A week later, Reuben's car alarm went off in the middle of the night. On his windshield was a pristine handprint made of bleach. Reuben finally tracked Dan to a closed industrial warehouse near the river, a place once used to store cleaning chemicals. Inside, the space gleamed with eerie precision. Every object aligned, every surface polished. And in the center stood Dan, dressed in a flawless white suit, his expression serene. "You came," Dan said softly. "You learned." Reuben drew his gun. "This isn't learning, Dan. It's delusion." Dan smiled. "No, detective. It's clarity. You see, the only truly clean act is erasure." He stepped backward, toward a vat of industrial acid already bubbling. Reuben shouted, ran forward. But Dan was gone before he could reach him. Only the gloves floated on the surface, dissolving slowly. Months later, Pure Scene received an anonymous package. Inside was a sealed vial labeled Perfection, sample number 9. Eva Drost, now running the company alone, didn't open it. She stored it in a locked cabinet, untouched. But sometimes she'd find it moved, slightly recentered, as if an unseen hand couldn't stand its imbalance. Detective Reuben retired shortly after, unable to shake the feeling that Dan hadn't died, that he'd simply disappeared into the very principle he worshipped. And across Rotterdam, whenever an accident seemed too perfect, too symmetrical, too improbable, someone would whisper, "Clean hands never last."